Well, thanks for the very warm welcome, you guys. I think I told my best fish story last year, and I realized as I thought about what story to tell that the next two best stories that I have, I couldn't tell you because they'd be giving up critical fishing secrets. But anyways, most of the stories I like to tell are about the people or situations that you come to know through seeking out fish anyways. My story's also way too long, so I'm going to fast forward about 2/3 of the way into it. Maybe we'll hear the beginning of the story next year. I had found myself out on a venture with a good friend of mine, lifelong adventuring buddy, been adventuring with him since I was in 4th or 5th grade, Jeremy. And on this particular occasion, we found that we didn't have enough food to keep going. And Jeremy very rationally recognized this, and he suggested that we should probably turn back. And I was just reluctant, maybe a little bit naive, and I really insisted that we should keep going. And I happened to know that we were in a place that had incredible bass fishing. And we weren't on a fishing trip at all, but at that time, we sort of fancied ourselves survivalists, and I had this little collapsible fishing pole that just sort of lived in my backpack. So I said, Jeremy, I'm going to catch you a fish, man. And so we decided, hey, well, that's a good idea. And we went to this lake, and sure enough, within about 10 minutes, we had two of the most remarkable fish that I've ever seen or ever caught. Both largemouth bass. The first one was about 12 or 14 inches, not a trophy by most people's standards, but we were there to catch food, right? So we were stoked. We're like, all right, we'll catch a couple more of these and we'll have a meal. Well, the next thing that happened is the next fish that came out was like one of the biggest fish that I've ever caught. So we decided, all right, we've got what we need here. Let's get to work cooking these fish. And at that point, Jeremy, as soon as I caught the first fish, Jeremy had already gone out and started gathering firewood. So we sat down to get this thing set up, and I reached in my pocket. I couldn't find my lighter, so I asked Jeremy, hey, can I see your lighter? And he said, I don't think I have one. And, we weren't worried about it. It was a little embarrassing because at that time in our lives, we would have had like 10 different ways to make fire on each of us. So I went over to my backpack, opened up the top hatch, no lighter. Side pocket, no matches. And I started to have this sinking feeling as I remembered cleaning out my backpack before the trip and taking out all kinds of things that we wouldn't need, but also taking out all kinds of fire-making implements, and then began to wonder if I had put them back. So I got all the way to the bottom of my pack, all my gear is spread out on the gravel bar, these beautiful fish are laying there, and we have all this wood, and I find at the bottom of my backpack 3 Anywhere Strike matches. So we're set. But let me be clear about this. These weren't like matches I put in there in case of an emergency. They were like 3 matches that had just haphazardly fallen out at one time or another. And you have to understand, this is a backpack that I wore while I waded through like chest-deep water or on multi-day excursions where it just rained the whole time. So they had been like alternately soaked and dry and soaked. But fortunately on this day, they were dry. Picture like oxidized, warped, brittle wood with the striking surface sort of the color of silly putty, all faded and oxidized. So we took those 3 matches and figured we'd better invest a little bit up front in the structure of our fire. So we made little wood shavings and splintered little sticks, and then we surrounded them by increasingly larger pieces of wood. And for tinder, we took a generous handful of dry grass stems and carefully sculpted them into like a hollow sphere with the tips facing inside to just optimize the chance if one of those matches barely ignited that we could get this thing going. So neither of us had to speak much about this. There was no conversation, but when it came to igniting it, we had this conversation. Do you want to give it a try? No, Meg, you go ahead. It was like neither of us wanted to take responsibility for it, but neither of us wanted to take the responsibility from the other. So Jeremy insisted. I took the first match, and I grabbed a little rock, and Jeremy stood on the upwind side. It wasn't really windy, but we just needed to maximize our odds, and took that first match, and nothing. In fact, you guys understand this, that like each time you strike a match and it doesn't ignite, your odds of igniting it go down by orders of magnitude, right? So I basically gently scraped off all the striking surface of this match. But we had 2 more, so we had the same conversation. Do you want to try this time? No, man, you're doing good. So I took the second match, got down there, waited for a lull in the wind. It flared up and went out. I didn't even have a chance to touch it to the grass. So we had one more match, and that was our last easy chance to light a fire. And so we had that same conversation, and once again, Jeremy insisted that I take the honors. I'm not sure if I was exactly happy to have that responsibility. I took the third match, got down there, and touched it into the dry grass. And it actually did everything we needed it to do. The grass carried it into the twigs carried it into the wood. And before you knew it, we were dancing around this big fire like you would have thought we were like stranded on an island and our lives depended on it. We were actually like 2 13-year-old kids, like a half an hour bike ride from home in like an old abandoned gravel quarry. So I hadn't learned the virtue yet of letting the fire burn down to coals before you put the fish on. So instead, we held this fish on like a willow twig over the flames. So it's sort of crusty and burnt on the outside and kind of underdone on the inside. I didn't cook the big fish. I insisted that I take it home to show my mom, which she wasn't actually all that thrilled about. But boy, you should have seen how much we enjoyed that crispy little bass over the fire.